Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. That is Tim. This is Second Legacy, and thank you for stopping by. Guys, today we are going to talk about some stuff that I covered on my other channel, Langley Outdoors Academy, around a bill that was introduced from Dan Crenshaw around curtailing the power of the ATF. Now, in my original video, I introduced the idea, but we have some time to dive deeper into it, and we're going to bring Tim along. We are going to hit this hard, and we're going to dive into every single detail because there's a lot of stuff here. What's worth it? What's not worth it? That's what we're going to hit today, and it allows us to kind of figure out exactly the details as we walk through. Now, the article that we're going to talk about, and this is something that was announced today, is Crenshaw drops bipartisan bill creating the ATF appeal route for the gun industry, and the agency has trampled on 2A rights. Now, before we dive directly into that bill, I'm sure a lot of you out there are thinking there's a lot of things that we need to discuss around what exactly has Crenshaw done in the past. Like I mentioned on my video, he had a rough 4 weeks. And we're going to dive into a few of those things because it all blends to make an entire ensemble. And that's what we got to talk about. And make sure that you guys subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below so we can help amend the channel to the best way that you would enjoy it. But with that, let's get over to Tim and let's talk about some of the backstory here because that is crucial to where we're going right now.
So when Crenshaw came into Congress, he immediately got into a conversation about red flag laws. And he was pretty much torn up on social media for his support of red flag laws. He co-sponsored a bill, I believe, in that regard, which was a bill that would allow the federal government to fund red flag laws across the 50 states if they wanted to enact them, right? And so he was getting pretty shredded in social media. His office reached out to me. I had about a half-hour conversation with Representative Crenshaw, and I would say it was a good conversation. I learned a lot about his positions with regards to the Second Amendment. And one thing that he and I completely disagreed upon was, whether or not red flag laws are a good thing. Obviously, in my opinion, red flag laws are a bad thing. By their very nature, they infringe on our rights. There's no such thing as a red flag law that is mindful of your constitutional rights. That it's oil and water. They don't mix, in my opinion. So we had that conversation. And he was pretty adamant about the concept of, look, I'm pro-gun. I want the gun community behind me. I'm trying to help the gun community. They're tearing me apart. They're not listening. They don't understand how politics work in D.C. Politics in D.C. is give and take. There has to be compromise. You have to engage the other side in conversation. That's just how it works. We have to give something to get something. And I tried to explain to him that gun owners are tired of giving because we never get anything. There's no compromise. There hasn't been in my entire life. What they call compromise is actually a surrendering of our rights. And I tried to explain that to him, and I don't think we really saw eye to eye during that conversation. But I tried to explain to him why the gun community was so hostile towards him and his support for these red flag laws. I told him that the Second Amendment community has dug its heels in because we are done with the whole concept and notion of compromise and making deals because we always lose. We never get anything, and we lose everything. And it's a long-term strategy by the anti-gunners to completely disarm us because they're just going to, death by a paper thousand cuts, if you will. All right. And so that's kind of where Dan and I left the conversation. He hasn't spoken to me since. I've reached out since trying to talk to him about various things that have happened in the last 2 years. And he's just kind of gone radio silent. I'm sure he's a busy man. It's nothing personal, but I've not been able to have any further conversations with him. And so then we see this pop up. And, I do believe that Representative Crenshaw is pro-gun to a degree, but as we both know, in the Second Amendment community, there's always a purity test, right? Mm-hmm. You have the 100% purity test people that I want nuclear weapons and, warplanes and tanks and all the other good stuff like that. And then you have the other people on the other side of the spectrum where, at 100%, nuclear weapons and warplanes, the 0% where you shouldn't own anything, not even, a BB gun. And so I would say that Crenshaw probably falls in the 80% area of that spectrum of the purity test, right? He certainly believes in certain things that we don't believe in because we are 2A absolutists. We think the Second Amendment's written pretty clearly, and there are no boundaries on what we should be able to own. If the military should own it, we should be able to own it. That's what we believe. Dan doesn't think that way, not what I gathered from our conversations, right? So he believes in red flag laws. He thinks that they're just. And he's now introduced this piece of legislation that they're calling bipartisan, but as far as I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it has the support of one Democrat from the state of Texas. So it's not exactly bipartisan.
Well, in Washington, that is bipartisan, Tim. I mean, look, we have both letters.
I mean, in today's world, absolutely. If you can get one person to go along with you on the other side of the aisle, then I guess we are in a bipartisan environment at this point.
See,
and I do want to say that, last time I was in D.C., I met with a number of representatives when we were talking about various issues. And almost everybody that was pro-gun told me that there was not a single vote on the Democrat side of the aisle in D.C. There was not a single vote to be had for anything pro-gun. And so seeing that they have at least one Democrat from Texas that's willing to back this is rather interesting, given that statement was made not even a year ago.
Right. And so one thing just to tack on there, and this is as we go into this, you've also got a scenario where Crenshaw also came out, had a rough time about 3 to 4 weeks ago with the Republicans when he openly called them traitors. He went on CNN and he had to backpedal that real quick when they were over the whole McCarthy debate. We covered it on this channel. But one thing that's so crucial, and I want to kind of add a little piece to what Tim was just saying, it's not that we're positioning in this argument for one or the other of that purity test of which he referenced, because one of the things that's so powerful about where we're at is we have such an amazing dichotomy of different perspectives, which make us stronger in the end run. The Second Amendment, the freedoms that we have and we protect, it's incredibly powerful. However, when you have different perspectives inwardly disagreeing, it makes it harder to unify in a forward front. That's kind of what we're driving towards in this conversation. Like, for example, what we're about to cover, it's not necessarily Dan Crenshaw did it, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mentioned that on my other video. However, there's also things in the past that Dan has been aligned to which are concerning. That's what we're trying to align. We're trying to lay it out the best that we can so you guys are informed, but also have a full understanding of the history as well. So with that, let me show you what he's actually doing here. And Mr. Producer, if we jump on number 2 here, Representative Dan Crenshaw, Republican Texas, dropped a bipartisan bill that would create an avenue for firearms companies to appeal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives rulings, Fox News Digital has learned. Now, out the gate, I'm for a way to curtail the abuse of the executive branch through bureaucracies on our rights, 100%. Now, does that mean that Tim and I are going to sit here and say that red flag laws are a good thing? No, they interfere with due process. You're purchasing safety with your freedoms. It's not a good look throughout the entire history of humankind, not just Americans. But this is something that is a beginning, at least a stepping stone. Would you agree, Tim? Have I kind of lined that one?
Yeah, I think so. What's interesting about this bill is that it's trying to create a process by which the industry, either manufacturers, importers, retailers, can contest a ruling by the ATF and have a process by which they can say, hey, look, we don't agree with this. This really is going to damage our business. This is trampling 2A rights. We really would like to appeal this. They're adding another layer through this bill, should it pass, to allow the industry and the people a mechanism by which to challenge these rulings. The problem I have, and I want to preface this by saying, guys, I'm not a lawyer. I can only go by what's released publicly in the media and what other people might say. So a lot of the stuff that we're going to touch upon here might be some speculation. But it would seem to me that we're asking the agency itself to reevaluate its determination, right? So what this legislation does, if it were to pass, would create a system by which an administrative judge would be assigned to take a look at the ruling and render a decision based upon the input from the industry or the people. And we kind of looked up what these administrative judges are. And if Mr. Producer could bring up number 8, we can kind of look at a website that we found via Google that talks about these administrative law judges that would be playing a pivotal role in this piece of legislation and determining whether or not what the ATF in this case is doing is constitutional, is just, is going to meet muster or not. And if you take a look at this description on the website of what these lawyers do, I think the things that are important to point out. Again, I'm not an attorney. I'm going based upon what's on this particular law website, which is Cornell Law School, and trying to understand what these judges actually do.
And will be linked down in the description box as well.
Yes, and we will put a link to this down in the description box below. So in essence, what these judges do is they take care of disputes within agencies themselves. These judges, based upon what we've read here, are appointed or hired by the agencies themselves, by the heads of these agencies themselves, and they play by the same rules as any other employee of said agency. And their jurisdiction can be questioned. So if they come up with a ruling that you're not happy with, it would seem that you could appeal this to a federal judge in a federal court, which is something we would do anyway, right? So if we're not happy with, say, the Brace ruling, we can already take that to the courts. But this would add another layer to that. We would go back to the ATF based upon this legislation, saying, hey, can you kind of take a look at this? Here's our argument. This is why we think it's not valid and should be reconsidered. And then this judge, which is part of the bureaucracy, would take a look at it and render a decision. And then again, if we don't agree with that decision, we could take it to the federal court. So I would urge you to read what an administrative judge is, how they interact with these agencies. Again, that link is in the video description below, so you can kind of better understand what this bill would do and how it would operate.
Yep. And so this is the best part about this whole conversation, is because the longer time frame of the second legacy allows us to dive into literally the beginning, the middle, the end, and the outcome. And what we're going to try to kind of tie together right now is I'm going to show you on a high level some things, and then I'm going to show you the end. All right. So, for example, Mr. Producer, if you could hit number 4 for me. Some of the quotes that Dan Crenshaw is saying, they are the right words. I'll be honest. Far too long, the ATF has trampled on the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, calling it sickening. We saw this most recently with a new rule banning the use of pistol braces, a shameless slap in the face to disabled veterans. If you could jump over to number 5, sir. Overzealous anti-gun government bureaucrats shouldn't get the final say on blocking Americans from exercising their fundamental rights, he added. Now, those are the right words, but that's where we're at right now. Tim just showed you what will happen after the appeal process. But now, if you look at the beginning and say, hey, there's been a questionable past, some questionable 2A support from the sponsor of the bill, you hear his words, you see what the bill would actually do. And now let's look at the why, because if the outcome is almost the exact same, why would this be important? Why would he bring this forward? And Tim, do you want to set up some possibilities? Again, this is complete conjecture, but yeah, it does beg the question.
Certainly. I mean, all we can do is speculate. So first of all, I want to say that I personally believe that this bill has very little possibility of making it through the Senate. And it certainly won't make it across Biden's desk. He is not going to sign this bill into law. So it has, in my opinion, a 0% chance of actually becoming law. So then why introduce it? Well, I've heard different arguments over the years. We've had this discussion going back to the American, what was it, the Suppressor Act that we were trying to get passed years ago to get the suppressors off the registry. We knew at the time that it wasn't going to pass the House and the Senate or the presidency, but we wanted to introduce the bill, get it voted on, and the logic there, explained to me by people that work in D.C., is that we got to get these bills out there, get them into the public narrative, get people talking about them. And even though we can't get them passed today, eventually we'll be able to get them passed because we're going to start that conversation. We're going to keep it in front of people's faces and get them talking about it, keep them talking about it. So that appears to be the strategy. Now, in a shorter view, in a more narrow view of things, you would look at this and go, this just looks like a political stunt to me. This looks like pandering to the Second Amendment community because Dan has really stepped in it multiple times with the 2A community, and perhaps this is how he gets back in their good graces. So which is it, right? Is this a true political strategy that's going to benefit us in the long run? Or is this Mr. Crenshaw just playing politics and trying to bolster his support within a community that's turned their backs on him? I can't answer that question. But it certainly is an interesting question.
I'm kind of riding the fence on that one. This is my personal opinion. I absolutely think there's an element of getting back into good graces. I think that's one of those things that's kind of transparent, right? There's not an election coming up. You've already gotten past the election. There's not a chance that it's going to go past the president's desk if it gets through the Senate. And by the way, there's a companion bill that's going to be in the Senate. Now, that's where it gets really interesting, because while these things can be self-motivating, okay, fine. That's a politician. Let's be real. Politicians are self-motivating. It still puts the chess piece on the chessboard, and that's what I like to see. Now, again, is the guaranteed short term a positive, like it's going to happen? Not necessarily. But down the road, if you've had a bill introduced multiple times, you see this on the left consistently, gun control bills are always re-brought up because they're already in the Federal Register. All you got to do is put a new number on them and put them on the floor to vote. And I think that is an incredibly important piece, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because now that chess piece is on the board, whether it be for team effort or self-motivation. I mean, to be honest, they're politicians, right? And that's kind of the way our system is set up. It's in your best interest to continue doing what we want you to do because you represent us, or you won't anymore. So there's kind of an element of, honestly, both. That's my opinion.
Right. My question to you is, do you see a benefit of adding this extra layer of bureaucracy in the decision-making process? Do you see a benefit to this? Because as I've pointed out, based upon what research we've done, it would seem that this appeal is being sent right back to the ATF and its employees, and therefore, is the ATF going to self-regulate itself? Can we really trust that they would do that? Because this isn't being sent out to an independent counsel type person. This isn't being sent out to a nonpartisan third party that's outside of the executive bureaucracy. This is just being sent right back to ATF for them to reevaluate. So my question to you is, if that's true, right? That's just certainly what it seems like based upon what we've seen in the media. Does that really truly have any value, or does this make more sense? Like, let's just get it to the federal courts and argue our case, the circuit courts, and take it to the SCOTUS if we have to. See, does this just drag this out? Instead of getting this resolved in a year or two, this drags it out to 3 years or more. You know what I mean?
My opinion on that is, I think it has more of a deterrence effect value rather than an actual true, hey, are they going to be held to account by an administrative judge that's impartial or not involved in the executive? You're right. To your point, it's just going to go to a judge that's appointed by the executive directors who run the agencies. And then if they don't find in the form that you want in 90 days, I mean, at least they put timestamps in there. And then it goes to a federal judge. And you're in the exact same system you're going to already be in. So I absolutely see your point. Is it duplicitous? Or is it a deterrent where it's such a pain in the butt that every single manufacturer, every single person puts forward these appeals, and then it has a deterrent effect? I think long run, I don't see a negative on our side of it, but I also don't think it's a raging success. It's the golden bullet. The monster has been slayed. Does that make sense?
Oh, I think that's a fair assessment, honestly. I'm just trying to play both sides here so people will think about it. I think that the intent is solid. I don't question the intent. I do believe that there are pro-gun, politicians that are looking for ways to hold the ATF accountable for their actions. And it's not just the ATF. Let's be fair. Almost all of these government agencies, they have the same problem. The EPA just got its hand slapped recently for the exact same thing ATF is doing to us right now. And it's just this constant back and forth in battle. And so I do like to see our representatives taking action, bringing this to the public awareness, and trying to do something. Right now, is this the right something? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But
I think you just hit on something so key. I'm sorry to cut you off. I think you just hit on something. You nailed it. If we, for lack of a better term, if we endorse and we essentially train our representatives that they get bona fides, that they get positives when they do things that help us, even if they don't win immediately, they're not going to be deterred from doing more in the future because they've got a sting on their hand the last time that they did it. I think that there's value in supporting a pro-2A move. Again, looking at everything as part of the picture, I think there's value to say, yes, you have done things in the past I don't like. But in this one moment, in this action, that's good. I will give you a positive reinforcement. I expect to see more in the future. I think that there's value in that because it will embolden people to do it more often if they see a positive outcome, even though it doesn't win the day in the end.
Let me play devil's advocate because I'm curious, since we haven't discussed this already. Yeah. We will see in the comments, well, why didn't he introduce a bill to abolish the ATF? Why are we playing this game? Why aren't we just trying to end the authoritarian rule of these agencies? Why are we playing this game of trying to make them self-regulate? Why aren't we being more forceful and trying to abolish them? What's your take on that?
So that's an excellent question because you're 100%. That is going to be in the comments.
There will be.
Oh, absolutely. It'll be like thrice. I think that's
it's tough, right?
Question.
Go ahead.
No,
that's why I threw it in your lap.
So come at me, bro. I think that's a very interesting perspective. Okay. Now, and we could do a video on this solely, but if you look at the history of the ATF, they actually were invented as a revenue generating center for the executive. I mean, for the executive branch of the government. They were taxing alcohol and they were taxing tobacco before firearms even got thrown in there. And before that, they were part of the IRS. So they have a long history of being a fund generating center for the government. Now, they got executive powers, basically not executive powers, rather, but the executive branch empowered them to enforce lots of different laws through many different things. 1968 Gun Control Act, the NFA of 1934. I think if you were to look at abolishing the ATF, like Matt Gaetz put that bill out there, I think that you run the risk of jumping out of the frying pan and into the fryer. For example, on the ATF, they are a separate line item on budgetary concerns. They are a separate enforcement agency. And that's one of the complaints of the gun control group on the left is they say the ATF is underfunded. They can't do digital registries. They can't do all these things. They don't have the agents. That's their consistent go-to. I think if you get rid of the ATF, that's going to go somewhere. I mean, I believe the last numbers that I saw from the actual
FBI, right?
Oh, it would either be FBI or DOJ. And that is
or they create a new agency.
Or they create a new one, or it could go NSA. But the point is, they've got so much more budget in the larger organizations where you have less control over it from a government oversight perspective. You think it's bad now, potentially that could be a nightmare. You could be kicking a hornet's nest that you aren't really ready to kick. Now, do I believe the overreach of the ATF is just? No, I do not. I think that they are essentially flexing their muscles to remain relevant in what we're dealing with. But I get very concerned when I talk about abolishing the ATF because that power is not just going to vacate into a vacuum. It's going to go somewhere else. That's my main concern.
Yep, and I think you're right because it will go somewhere else because the government's not going to relinquish its control over the people, especially with regards to the Second Amendment. That they're not going away. If we did successfully abolish the ATF, you're absolutely right. It would just wind up under the jurisdiction of another agency. And the ATF's role has evolved over the years. Post 9/11, ATF has become really not a tax revenue service anymore. It is a criminal justice service, if you will. I mean, it falls under the DOJ now. So, and I remember the days when it was part of the IRS and stuff like that. So, it's definitely not going to go away. And it's interesting to see what Representative Crenshaw is doing. I would like to see the votes on this. I'm really interested because my guy, Senator Braun, has introduced the parent bill, the co-bill, into the Senate. And I'm really interested to see what the vote count looks like, especially coming out of the Senate. And it would be really interesting if they could flip one or two Democrats. I don't think that they could, but if they could, that would be really, really interesting because then that would put everything on Biden and what he would do. But I'm almost confident he would veto it, or whoever's pulling his strings would veto it.
Absolutely. There would be a veto of some form or fashion, but that is an excellent way to end this discussion. Tim, thank you so much for hanging out with me. It is my pleasure to be on the Second Legacy with you. And if you guys are new and you're still with us, please hit that subscribe button. Leave comments. I cannot wait to read them. And we will see you on the next episode. See you later.